Hello, how are you? This is Scott Montgomery with the Small Town Mercer. I'm going to finish up on my series of inflation and the traditional labor versus the modern labor. And I'm going to start to show you the transition now between the, um, the traditional model that we're all grew up with and we're all used to into the more modern technological model. Now remember, I was talking about the tech bubble, and that was really a sentinel event coming into the mid to late 90s, even more so, I think, than NAFTA. And so basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you, I'm going to illustrate to you how this inflation worked, or what it looks like. Because a lot of us don't realize that we've transitioned into a different economy now. And I'm going to take an example. It's like a case study, basically. I'm going to present it to you in this video. And I'm going to show you that what it looks like, because we don't notice it today. I mean, I think it's crept upon us and we don't really see it for what it is. Some people do, but a lot of people don't. And again, I'm kind of building a case for why cryptocurrency is really going to be big in the future, much more so than it is now. So anyway, let's get to it. Up here, I'm going to lay out the ground rules for. I'm going to compare and contrast the 20th century economy with what we've got going now today. Okay? I hope you can see this. I hope this is big enough. I notice when I look at the videos later, my letters actually look bigger than I think they do when I'm doing this. So we'll see. I hope you can read this. But this is the 20th century traditional economy, and there were three traits involved in the traditional economy as the 20th century starts and as it ends. Those three traits are number one, 20th century, a lot of our jobs were very labor intensive. It's going to get less so as the century moves along, but it's very labor intensive. Number two, it is very technological. Now, as compared to the 19th century, I think it's going to be a lot more technologically advanced than it was. Even though as you see America's development, you notice that around the time of our revolution in the late 1700s, so that's the late 18th century, you're going to see that 95% of people were farmers, and then you had merchants, and our manufacturing is just kind of getting started. We're really not a renowned manufacturing area yet, and largely people are self-sufficient. They're repairing their clothes and their implements, even making them in some instances on the farm. You don't really have that sector developed yet. As the 1800s come along, you're going to see mechanization start to come about. And by the time you get to the 20th century, then you're going to see I'd say a more advanced society as far as technology, as far as machinery. And I'll get into that in a minute. So, and then finally, you're going to have a lot of volatility, because with technology comes volatility. I've already explained in the last video that, as technology comes about, it's more sophisticated. And the difference between the 21st century sophistication and the 20th century sophistication is the 20th century sophistication still was very labor intensive. As we get to the next century, that's not necessarily going to be the case. All right, so anyway, so it's going to be very volatile. And we know that. We know that to be the case. I mean, in the early 20th century, I'd say 1907, we have a panic. So much of a panic, which basically is a mini depression. Back then it was. So much so that we have to create a Federal Reserve Bank, which we do. And then we have a sort of a mini depression. A lot of people don't realize this, but at the end of World War I, we had a mini depression. We don't need all that manufacturing of bombs and equipment anymore because the war is over. So back in 1921-22, we had a huge recession, and the government really didn't get involved in that one, and that one kind of righted itself very quickly. And then we get into the Great Depression era. We have Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. Both of them are trying to use, this is the first use of stimulus programs. Hoover was kind of a champion of welfare programs, welfare to work programs, and a lot of aid going to states and banks. Roosevelt was more aggressive on that. And so you had a lot of stimulus money being pumped into the economy. And this is the first time we confiscated gold during the Roosevelt years. So we're trying to sort of break away from that hard gold standard that America has long treasured, I would say. And so it doesn't completely happen, but like I said, you're going to have Bretton Woods in World War II that's going to establish how much gold backs a certain amount of currency and so forth and so on. You can research Bretton Woods on your own time. I want to make a fairly quick video today here. So these are the three things you're going to see in the 1920s. Now, I want to show you something, and it's going to be kind of a case study. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down. Here, I'm going to erase this because I need a lot of room. Okay. So I'm going to show you, and I think it's a good case study because I grew up there, and I'm going to show you San Jose, California. San Jose, California. And that's basically Silicon Valley. Okay. And I'm going to go from 1965 until 2020. All right. And I'm going to show you something. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you what inflation really looks like versus, the kind of economy we had when we were somewhat on the gold standard. Now, I'm not going to say we were fully on the gold standard, but we were somewhat on the gold standard. And so that's why I wanted to go back to 1965. We're still on the gold standard. Okay. And this is going to be very simple. In 1965, the average worker made about $480 per month take-home pay. Take-home pay, THP, how about that? Wow, that's awful. $480 a month, take-home pay. An average house during this year, you could have gotten a house in San Jose, a common house, not a really nice house or a dump, We're talking about a common 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home type house. Okay? That was fairly new, built within 5 to 10 years. You could get that house for about $23,000. $23,000, okay? So I'm not going to get into interest rates. I'm not going to get into what food and all that costs. That would be a very lengthy video. I could do that, but I don't need to for the purposes of showing you inflation. I'm just going to break it down to these elements. Okay. Then what I want to do is 1970. In 1970, now remember, we're still on the gold standard, more or less. The Bretton Woods standard, the gold standard, okay? we've still got some amount of gold backing up our economy. So by 1970, and my writing is kind of crowded here. I should move this down a little bit. Let me do this. Let me move this out a little bit more. All right. So we'll just say in 1970, and these are the gold years. And I'm going to show you this to show you how sound money works. 1970, the average worker now is making about take-home pay, I think is it $565? Yeah, $565 per month. And this is take-home pay, right, THP. And 1970, the house costs somewhere around $28,000. Okay. In 1960, my parents paid about $20,000 for their house. In 1965, their house was a little bit under 23. So, and their house was only about 26 or 27,000 in 1970. But we're going to stick with these numbers: 28,000, 23,000. That's a rough estimate. That's not much of an increase. So you're talking about in 5 years. What is that? About an $85 increase. Okay. Now, in 1975, remember I had told you previously in 1971, we are now off the gold standard. And so inflation is going to start to set in. Although in 1975, it's not going to really take shape yet because we're just coming out of that. So by about 1975, we're at $635 THP. So that's not bad, right? Not bad. 1975. I'm not a very good writer. A house is going to cost about $34,000. I actually put the dollar sign in the wrong place. Sorry about that. And then we'll continue on. 1980. Right, 1980. We've got we're up to $950, so that's getting a little better. And the house, I'll just put an H for house. The house, I think, is going to go up to about 41,000. All right. So there you go. And then I didn't do housing beyond that. So in 1985, I know by 1985, I know not to write below that. So I'm just going to say in 1985, just keep this in mind. Wages are now going to be, take-home pay is going to be $1,300 a month. So from 1965 till about 1985, you've gone up in wages about a little over $800 per month in that 20-year period, right? 1965 to 1985. I think in 1985 most houses were selling for around $50,000. You can look that up. I would love somebody to put that in the comments. But I think it was around $50,000, $55,000 for a house in 1985. It might have been a little more than that. It might have been 60 or 70,000. I don't know. But so you're seeing things are starting to go up. So going from about 100 or so dollars, in the 60s and 70s, to now it's starting to go up a little bit. From 75 to 80 went up almost $300, a little more than 300. And the house is now going up, quite a bit. It only went from about 23 to 34 in 10 years. And then 1980, it's going to go up a little more. Okay? So, but really, you still got a lot of, even in the 1980s, you still had a lot of manufacturing jobs. The computer industry was starting to, get going in the 1980s. and it was becoming, it was becoming Silicon Valley. I think it was by then. I think it was the number one employer. So yeah, I would say by the 1980s, Silicon Valley was the number one employer. You still had machining companies, but not a lot. Most of them were machining for the tech companies now and the construction industry. They weren't really machining for, appliance makers or car manufacturers. Remember, San Jose, we had car manufacturing, appliance manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing. A lot of it originally was in Oakland. That's what Oakland, California was. San Francisco was the shipping. You had some manufacturing. You had Levi Strauss was there at one point. Hills Brothers, the coffee makers, Folgers was actually there. So was Starbucks. They all started there. But you mostly you had banking and finance in San Francisco and shipping. You still had a lot of that. In the 1980s, that starts to go away now. All right. So, but that's largely what you had. You had a lot of manufacturing. You had car plants. You had, I think I don't know what's left there anymore. I think Tesla moved out, so I don't think anybody's making them there anymore. But you used to have them there. Chevron was always there. Um, but you had appliance manufacturing, you had parts manufacturers, you had lots of machine shops. A lot of the hard physical aspects of computers were made there, machined there. The electronics was made there. Obviously, the chips were made there. So a lot of these things were made there. And then eventually they all started to move out. Okay. Let's continue on with this scenario here. So from now we're getting into the 1990s. Oops. 1990s. So we're going from 1990 now to about 2020, right? So from 1990, you're going to see this thing jump up quite a bit. So in the 1990s, we'll go 1990. I want to wrap this up pretty quickly. 1990, we're at about 1880 now per month. Let's go 2000. 2000, we're talking, where is it? 4,050. 2010, I don't think I did 2010, did I? I did 2005 because between 2005 2010, I'm sorry, between 2000 and 2005, this is that tech bubble I was talking about. And so what's going to happen is that you had a lot of people paying a lot of money to get their product out. And like I said, not all of them sold, not all of the ideas took off. A lot of speculation, speculative investment went into it, and speculative investment oftentimes, you lose because it's very risky. And so by 2005, wages are actually going to fall. But by 2010, they're going to be back. Usually in 2007, 2008, the wages are going to go back up above this number. And so by 2010, you're going to have $4,500 at that point. And then all the way to 2015, now it really gets exciting, right? Now you're talking $6,700 take home pay. So 1990 to 2015, that 25 year period, 1990 to 2015, that 15-year period, look at the difference. It's more than $1,600. Do you know from 1965 to 1985, the average monthly pay went up about $1,600 a month in 20 years. 1990, to about 2015, in that 15-year period, it went up, $4,700. which is triple what it did in that 20-year period going to 1985. So basically you could look at it from 90 to 95 to 2015, right? That 20, I'm sorry, 1995 to 2015. 95, it was 2150. That's what I wanted to do. I screwed up, sorry. 1995 to 2015, it was 2100, sorry. Okay, 2100. I screwed up, I'm sorry. It was 2100, roughly, a little more than 2100. So you're talking about a $4,500 increase in that 20 years, 1995 to 2015. So you see it's 3 times more of an increase than it was in that 20-year period from 65 to 85. And now we're purely on what we call fiat currency. And fiat currency is the currency, right, that's not backed by gold anymore. It's backed by government, what should we call it? Government faith. You know when you go to a religious ceremony and there's a faith healer there. Well, it's the same thing here. The government has faith healers and they heal your money. So, and this is what's happening. Do you realize that today in San Jose, California, 2020, we'll just say 2020, in the year 2020, today, you're talking $91 to $9,300 per month is what people make in the Bay Area today. And that's the lesson I wanted to touch about today. And that is this, that when you are in a technological advancement, and the tech bubble 1995 to 2000, after the tech bubble, like I said in the previous video, after that tech bubble emerged, remember it comes crashing down because people can't use or don't know how to use the technology. And so over a period of time, then the technology funnels into things that can be used. And what were the things that start to emerge? You're starting to see, get a lot of calls from DC, I don't know why. You're starting to see the internet emerge, right? I said cell phones are starting to take off. I said this in a previous video. I hesitate to say online banking. I think that started a little later, but I'm going to put online banking because I believe that's starting to take off a little bit later than that. Online banking, that's a terrible G. Sorry about that. But I can remember doing online banking probably in the mid-2000s, maybe earlier than that. But also online investing is starting to take up too. I started doing that around 2007 and 8. And it may have even been around a little bit before that. So, and other things, we're starting to have, I think the laptop computer is getting stronger. I think laptops were around before that, but certainly, we're starting to get to be a more technological society now. You're starting to see drafting. Remember I said in an earlier video that that was all paper. All the paper stuff is starting to go to the computer now. That was one of the first things that started to happen. So now you're getting all this technology. What's happening now is if we go back and we look, right? If we go back and look at my original premise for the traditional economy, this is what we're down to now. Our economy today is just it's much more technological. It's going more rapidly, right? And the other thing is what? What's the other thing? More volatility, more economic volatility. And we saw that, didn't we? 2008, we had a huge financial crisis. You know, after the tech bubble, 2007, 2000, or 2008, 9, 10, huge problem. A lot of stimulus involved in that. Okay, we had another sort of recession in 13 and 14. It didn't last long. I don't think a lot of people really consider that a recession. It was part of a slowdown. And then 2016, we had another slowdown. And then we had some good times, 2017, 2018, 2019, it kind of slowed down a little bit. 2020 kind of reemerged, and then all of a sudden, COVID hit. So that's another volatile process. So back, in the last 20 years, 3 major crises that hurt the economy, and we're still dealing with the COVID thing. But inflation is the big thing, right? When you have just these two, but what did I leave out? What I left out was labor intensive. Labor intensive. Just to give you an example, Ford Motor Company in the year 1977, I did a lot of research on Ford for this because I wanted to narrow it down to one company so I could just throw out numbers. So I picked Ford because it was an obvious one for me. It's an easy one to understand because it's a traditional car company. And so the numbers, there's a lot of data and a lot of numbers on Ford and General Motors as well. But I just picked Ford because it's shorter. It's a shorter name than General Motors. So Ford. All right. I guess Dodge would have been another one. But Ford Motor Company, 1977, 376,000 employees. Ford Motor Company, 2020, 181,000 employees. You see the difference? And, they're still making a lot. Ford moved a lot of plants up here, so they still have a lot of plants here. Not as many as they did in the 70s. But what's the difference? The average auto worker makes what today? $80,000 a year? Back in 1977, they were making $6.80 an hour, and that was one of the higher paid jobs that a working person could get back in the 1970s. Today, I think they make well over 80, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But do you see the difference? So without the labor intensive part of it, the big companies, like they were in the past, those are not your employers anymore. They're not hiring 400,000 or 500,000 people anymore. They're hiring maybe 80 to 100,000 at the most, maybe less. And I don't know what Amazon hires. They've probably got people all over the place. I'm getting very popular right now. Maybe I should end the video. Oh God, I've gone 28 minutes. That's way too long. But I wanted to make this point very succinct. And that is that when you have less, will you stop? When you have less employment and you have more, the bigger companies are not hiring as many. You have a larger population. We're, back in the 70s, you're talking about 200 million people or so. Today, you've got, almost 350 million people in this country. So, and these big companies are not hiring like they were. The economy has changed. So people are now having to do more service end jobs, like I described before, more, I would say employment on their own. Either they're a business owner or they're working for a business owner, and they're the top guy for a business owner, or or you're a support person for businesses. In other words, you're doing accounting for them, or you're doing some facet, professional, professional services for that employer. You cater their food, or you install their furniture, or whatever. So you're seeing a lot of jobs like that, but a lot of those jobs are more risky today. And what I mean by that is they're more along the contractor self-employed route. So there's a good deal of profitability, but there is also more risk to that. It isn't like the old days when you worked for somebody, got a paycheck, were there 25, 30 years, and got a decent retirement, and the inflation was very low. Like I said, like I showed you, from 65 to 75 in a very, highly populated area in the San Francisco Bay Area, San Jose, prices aren't growing a whole lot until we start to get off the gold standard, get on fiat currency, and the technology starts to drastically ramp up. And technology is more and more expensive. Think about this. In 1900, how many people owned a car, had a garage, had a washing machine, had a radio or a television later on, or a phone, or brought their clothes to the dry cleaner, had a lot of clothes, had a lot of shoes, had a vacuum cleaner, whatever, you know what I mean? Not a lot. But by the end of the 20th century, certainly the 1970s and 80s, virtually everybody had that. So, virtually everybody did. Virtually everybody had most of those elements. Okay? Today, if you own a television or things like that, you don't necessarily need those, because technology has gone to the point where you're using your phone and your computer for most of everything, even for your living, for your income. So, technology is changing it, and that is much more technologically advanced, and those type of people who work in that industry are highly prized, and they're going to make a lot more money than the worker of the past. And so that, combined with inflation, means that you're going to have a lot of volatility. And in my next video, I'm going to start to transition towards cryptocurrency, because this is the technology of the future. This is the next step up from the current technology. And it's a lot more intricate. And we're going to get into that in a future video. So I'm sorry I went very long. And I thank you for watching. This is Scott Montgomery with the Small Town Mercer. Be blessed. See you next time.